So who out there is running CNG vehicles, CNG trucks? All right, there's some. No. What's this? We've been, this is one of our CNG vehicles here. I'm mostly going to talk about the heavy trucks and our experiences with them. Mostly it's going to talk about the buying, the requirements that you hit with buying, quality assurance issues, vehicle certification issues, things like that, our experiences. So this is what I'm going to go through. We're going to talk about the cost, legal requirements, emission issues that we've had, equipment issues, and like I said, the quality assurance. Okay, up front. Up front, you can expect to pay $50,000 to $80,000 more a vehicle. And I've seen them be up to $100,000 more a vehicle. It's a big upfront cost. The other thing that is kind of troublesome for us is that you lose payload and you lose real estate on the vehicle, right? I'm going to go back here a couple slides. This right here, that's the CNG tank. You can see the size of that thing, right? Typically, you're going to lose 2 to 3 feet of your cab axle space. Okay, this is an indication of a diesel versus a CNG. These true trucks are the same trucks. I mean, if you look at them from here back, this is our fence and guardrail truck, by the way. But if you look at them from here back, it's the same truck. You'll notice, though, that when we went to CNG, we lost the space behind the cab, and it also forced us into a 3-axle chassis instead of a 2-axle chassis. And then the cab over just happened to be because that's the only vehicle that was available in the horsepower torque that we needed for that. Okay, so we ended up paying, I think, some extra for the cab over configuration also. Okay, so federal regulations for CNG vehicles. There's really two big ones, and that's the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards and CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards really, okay, the first one is for the lighter duty vehicles. This is more for the heavies, and all it talks about is fuel integrity systems, right? And mostly what this says, what it really says, is that you have to have labeling. That's what it mostly says. And it says you should have a tank inspection. CFR 49, this one's about vehicle certification. Everybody's familiar with vehicle certifications, incomplete, intermediate, and final. This one's important for us because we're actually a final vehicle manufacturer. The truck I showed you at the beginning, we actually built that truck, we assembled it at the shop, and we became the final vehicle manufacturer for it. Well, this is how it works. If you get a truck, say from, I'll just use company A, and they put a diesel engine in it, and what they'll typically do is they'll put like an offshore diesel engine in it with minimal engine management system. They'll ship it off to a upfitter, and the upfitter installs the CNG engine and the management system. That upfitter becomes an intermediate vehicle manufacturer, okay? And then we, as the end user, and when we put the body on it, we become the final vehicle manufacturer. Well, the issue for us is if the intermediate vehicle manufacturer doesn't certify that vehicle, we as the final manufacturer take on all that responsibility from the OEM, skip over the intermediate manufacturer who put in the CNG engine and the fuel management system to us. That is instantly ours. So we're pretty picky about making sure that all those federal motor vehicle safety standards were met at the right time so we don't take that on. Okay, so what do we learn about federal regulations? There's not very many. Very small. That covers all of us, right? Very small. So California regulations. This is where it starts to get sticky. California regulations in Title 13, it says that we shall follow the National Fire Protection Association Publication 52. I call it NFPA 52. So what does that mean? It means that everything in here became law for us on a state level. The other thing that happens is NFPA 52 references, it's right down here, 56 other publications. And it says that any should references in NFPA 52 will be interpreted as mandatory. So all of these just became requirements. All the way down to, they even reference, this is kind of interesting, the Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary. Just became a legal requirement for us. It's funny until you live on this side of the world in California. Okay, I call this kind of going down the rabbit hole. So what happens is NFPA mentions a requirement, but they'll reference compressed natural gas vehicle, which references somebody else, and so you got to go down and follow these regulations one by one. You've got to start reading through. And whenever they reference another one, you've got to go research that reference. And it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper for you. Okay, so what are the lessons learned? The majority of the regulations for us are on the state side, which is an odd thing when you talk about manufacturing vehicles. Okay? So you need to know, if you're going to get involved with CNG, you need to know if your state has these regulations also. California has, in one of their titles, Title 13, it says we shall follow this policy. You need to know if you have that also. The other thing is you're going to have to dig for the rules. That's just the way it is. They reference one rule to the next, and the more of the rules you read, the more the requirements, and the more you're going to learn. The last thing is you're really going to have to develop your own experts. Okay. I'm going to talk about repair facilities, what it takes to actually work on a CNG vehicle, and the state requirements. This is a different code for us in California, California Fire Code, and that's what is the oversight over what we do on our facility level. Okay, and it has its own, requirements, ventilation systems. It has the heaters. You obviously can't have heaters, what have you. The problem for us, and probably like you guys too, we don't have any brand new facilities. We have very few. And for my specific facility that I work at in Sacramento, where we actually assemble some of these vehicles, we're a historic building. The building was built around the early 1920s. So we don't have any of these systems. So we started looking at, well, what are our alternatives to this? What else can we do? Well, we said, first off, well, we could pull the tanks off the vehicle. Whole another set of requirements when you pull the tanks off the vehicle. It's a facility issue. As soon as you pull the tanks off the vehicle, they're not really covered under the vehicle requirements. They're covered under facility requirements. And the thing with CNG tanks is they're big enough that you have specific storage issues. And so now all of a sudden, if we pull the tanks off the vehicles, we're going to have to put up bollards. We had to make sure that the tanks couldn't be tipped over. We'd had to have racks. We couldn't hit 125 degrees max temperature. These are out on the asphalt. Asphalt gets pretty hot. I think California right now is 107 yesterday. In Sacramento, it's probably 107, 108 today. It doesn't take long before you hit some temperatures like this on the asphalt. So we probably would have had some shade requirements. You have to have distances from public areas. More requirements, right? So this is what we came up with. We said, well, what if we defueled them? So that's what we do. This was actually the best solution. I think because it came out of our design group. It's pretty ingenious, I think. We built our own defueler. This is it here. Pretty simple little piping device. It has in it a combustion level here, right here. We put in a sensor to check the combustibility level. And what we do, and this isn't a requirement, but what we do to make sure that it's even safer is once we defuel the tanks, we purge them with nitrogen. Okay? So now, all of a sudden, we can take this vehicle and we can roll it in the shop. Everything's still on. It's got all the CNG stuff. We push it in the shop. We can weld on it. We can assemble the bodies. We can do all the work in an old facility. We haven't done anything to our facility. We get done. We can roll it back out. We can fuel it, and we can get it going. And all of this, it has minimal requirements on this. One of the bigger things is, basically, we had to put in a ground rod. So here's this same truck going through the defueling. You can see our defueling station here. Here's our nitrogen cylinders. There's our little ground rod in the ground. Pretty simple. Okay, so repair shops. We've got, I think, 26 some odd repair shops, 12 main shops, 26 shops, sub-shops total. And we ended up developing our own code of safe practices for our repair shops, knowing that our facilities were older and we really didn't have a lot of the equipment required under the fire code. So we went through and we found out what we could get away with, how we could work on these CNG vehicles, and we established our own code of safe practices. So what was our lesson learned out of all this? Basically, you need to establish some of your own code of safe practices with this. We were kind of, we looked for alternative solutions to not following all the building codes with our defueling. You might have some of the same opportunities. So that's what I would tell you. Look for alternatives, because I know facility costs are huge. And when you get into CNG, you know, it almost means building a new building sometimes. The other thing is transit authorities. There's a couple of big users out there. Transit authorities and refuse companies seem to be the early adopters of CNG. Go see what they're doing, because they've gone through all these things, and it might save you some trouble. Okay, in-service challenges. On the user side, there's a lot of challenges too. They have the same issues with the vehicles. If they park them in a heated barn or a facility, they might have issues too. You can't do that. So they have to park them outside. The other thing is the fueling infrastructure. CNG vehicles typically can't go as far, right? They have a limited range to them. So you need to know where your fuel infrastructure is. And the other thing you need to know is not that just that you can get there to get the CNG, but you also need to know what type of fueling system is there. There's different CNG fueling pressure systems. I think it started at 3,000 PSI, then they went to 3,600, and some of the newer ones are 4,200. They're not necessarily compatible. And the last thing you want to have happen is you drive to the facility and then you find out that you can't fuel your vehicle there, because then you're going to have the vehicle towed, right? The other thing is that the dealerships, I would say, who can work on your vehicles is probably pretty limited also. So you're going to have to work on your own training to make sure your guys know how to work on the CNG vehicles. Okay, issues. This is actually a real photo out of National Geographic, and it's out of China. And these are CNG bags that they're using to fuel these buses. It's kind of an interesting. It's pretty ingenious, really. Okay, so what are some of the issues that we've had with these? We bought 3 trash compactors here some time ago, within the last 2-3 years. And when we went through the quality assurance process, the first 2 went through fine. We accepted them into the fleet, put them in the fleet in service running. The third one, it had a backfire issue at the supplier. So We wrote them up for it. We said, hey, you need to fix this backfire issue. It's got a problem. They worked on it for 18 months to try to fix the backfire issue. What they wanted to do to fix it was to reflash the computer, the engine management system. And they said, well, we've got the code, we've been working with the engine people, and we're going to reflash it and everything's going to be fine. And we said, okay, that's great. Where's your engine documentation from California Air Resources Board that says it's a legal vehicle to be utilized in California? And I don't know how your states work, but you have the federal EPA emission standards, and then you also have to certify engine emission systems through California Air Resources Board in California. So it's another certification requirement that has to happen before you can sell the vehicle in California. So we asked for that documentation, that it was still an emission legal vehicle. They couldn't supply it. So that's where it stopped. We ended up defaulting that last vehicle because we couldn't make it we couldn't stop the backfire, and we didn't have any proof that it was a legal emission vehicle to run in California. After that happened, we soon started developing the same backfire issue with the other two trucks. That has yet to be resolved. So that's something that can happen. It's a new industry. They're still working through some issues too, I think. This is a CNG sweeper that we had an order for. This is an off-the-shelf sweeper. This is this one was manufactured on a cab chassis. When they did the CNG tanks, remember I showed you that first slide of how big that tank was, and I told you that you lose 18,000 or 1,800 to 2,000 pounds of payload. Well, the tanks on this one are right here. So when we looked at the first unit, we put it on the scales, we were at 20,480 pounds on the rear axle. The problem with that is that California laws for a single axle, 20,000 pounds an axle. We were already over the California legal limit with nothing in the hopper. This is, I think, pretty typical of CNG cab chassis mounted sweepers across the board. We actually have a fleet of CNG sweepers, but they're a special built sweeper. They're not mounted on a cab chassis, and they don't have the weight issues. So that's something you need to really be mindful of when you start buying CNG. Okay, so cab chassis that we bought. We've run across cab chassis where it didn't have the right certification labels on it, and I already talked about why that was important to us. We also, when we go through these, we find out that some of the components aren't really rated for CNG. We find out components aren't rated for CNG. We find out that they're missing components. We find out that there's no labels on them. The fuel lines are unprotected, various issues. And one of the other ones that just kind of bit us was the tank structure itself. This is a slide showing, if you look here, I'm not sure if everybody can see it, but you can see the multiple labels that have gone on this vehicle. I think this is the third label before the company got it right. And this takes a lot of time. I mean, your inspectors have to catch it. You have to make sure that the company understands what the requirements are, and they have to go back and do their own rework. Some slides of some of what we see. These are unprotected fuel lines. This is a fuel storage tank that is unprotected from UV. Here's another fuel. This is a fill line, and you can see it's only 2-3 inches away from the exhaust. These are all from the manufacturer. Okay. Tank support. These tanks, we just recently started bringing these in, and we found out that the tank supports were cracking. The legal requirement for a tank support is it has to have an 8G load. It has to be able to withstand an 8G load in 5 principal directions. So we ran an FEA model of this. Anything in the dark blue meets the 8G requirement. As it goes from dark blue to light blue to green, it gets worse. I think we're at a 4G. It goes down here in the yellow. When you hit red, it doesn't meet the any G requirement. And that's where we're having the failures. We're rebuilding, I think, 9 of these in our shops right now. We're pulling them back in and rebuilding the tank structures. There's our modifications to it. We put some additional supports, a vertical support in the back. And the other thing we did, there's a requirement to do tank inspections. If I go back, this is all a welded structure. Oh, this is all a welded structure. How do you inspect these tanks? You can't even get to them, right? So what we did when we started going through the rebuild of these, we made these panels removable on the sides, and we blocked them off so we don't get any sunlight on them. But also these back 2 panels, we made them removable also. So you can unbolt them, you can pull them off, you get complete access to the tanks, and you can go through and do the inspection. This is just an indication of how long it takes to go through some of these corrections. I think this one might have been on the certification labels. It took us about 8 months to work with the supplier to work through getting them to be able to supply us a legal chassis. Okay, so the industry challenges. You know, I said before that everything, the federal laws are really small, and that's, I think, how they build their vehicles. That's what they're used to. State laws, you know, when on CNG, it got to be a lot for us. And I think the industry has a huge challenge trying to figure out what all the requirements are on an individual state basis. I can't imagine going through 50 states and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do in a vehicle. And I can't say that I know that each state has different rules. I don't know that. I just know that in California, that's where all the real requirements are. So one of the things we did when we start running into issues, and the more you go research them, we had to work on training our quality assurance inspectors also. So we took a lot of the laws and excerpts and we put them into our own quality assurance document for our guys to train them so they would know what to look for CNG vehicles. Okay, so what did we learn out of all that with the issues of new vehicles? Develop your own experts. Repeating theme here, right? You've got to do your own, you have to have your own people as being the experts. You need to know the requirements in your states because that's where all the rules really are. The industry, they're not necessarily the experts. They're following federal guidelines and that's very small. Okay, this is one of them. As a word of advice I'd say to you is we've had the most success when you get a complete CNG vehicle from an OEM manufacturer. If they manufacture the fuel system and the engine right from let's say it's Freightliner, that's your best opportunity to get the right vehicle. Resources, there's a lot of resources out there. There's people doing this, they're successful at doing it. These are some of the professional resources. I'm not going to go through all of them, except I'm going to say that if you're going to get involved in CNG, I would recommend that you get and read this document. And it has most everything you're going to need to know for CNG vehicles. NFPA 52. More references. So in summary, absolute minimal federal requirements on the CNG side. All the requirements that we found are on the state side, which means you're going to have to go build your own experts, know your laws. Questions? Exciting topic, I know. Yeah. We have in the past trained some of our mechanics, and we have self-certified. And we've also sent tanks out and had them certified. And that's one of the things that we're looking at is, do we need to go back through and do another certification program for our tank inspectors? Go through the training and certification. We did it at one time when CNG was popular, I don't know, it was probably 10, 12 years ago. And when everybody was buying the CNG gas pickups and what have you, we did it then. We really haven't adopted it on the heavy side yet. Down in South Coast, that's something I don't think I've talked a lot about, was that California Air Resources Board covers the emissions, what have you, air for California. Within California, there's 35 individual air districts. South Coast Air Quality Management District, one of those 35 air districts, is down in Southern California, where where the bad smog is, right? Because of the level of smog down there, South Coast actually got authority to establish their own rules, and under the health and safety codes, under the health codes. So they can establish their own rules and enforce them as law. South Coast is really what kind of moved Caltrans or forced Caltrans into going to a CNG fleet down in that area. And they pretty much said that if you're going to buy a heavy vehicle over 14,000 GVW, then you're going to buy it in an alternative fuel. No more diesel. We can run our diesel vehicles that are down there. We can't move diesel vehicles in. And when we replace them, they have to be in an alternative fuel. Well, really the only alternative fuel for heavy trucks, one of the best solutions I think was CNG. That's what got us into the CNG industry.
So that whole South Coast area, your heavy fleet is all CNG?
It's primarily CNG, except for the old diesel vehicles, and when those come up for replacement, they're going CNG. All of our sweeper fleet down in South Coast is CNG. Many of our trucks, we're looking at buying some striper trucks in CNG. We have Packer trucks in CNG, dump trucks. We even have a plow truck in CNG. Some of the lighter stuff we don't do in CNG, like cargo trucks. We'll buy them in gasoline. But they're limited on a horsepower torque, so you can only go so high in those.
Once you've defueled, I don't know that process, but once you've defueled, is there an opportunity to refuel? When you bring it back into service then, how does that work?
Yes. Yeah, and we do that. We actually put valves on, and we do tank to tank. So when we pull another truck through, we capture a lot of that lost fuel and push it right back into the empty truck.
Okay.
Yeah. And that way, it at least gets us to the next fuel station, and we don't waste fuel. Yeah.
What impact has this had on the rest of your fleet budget-wise? Have you had to make sacrifices in other areas to pay for the additional cost of the CNG upfits?
Yes, you bet. When some of the first fleet rules came out from South Coast, we had about 129 vehicles that were identified for replacement. Well, we went back and asked for an additional $125 million on top of the cost of those vehicles to replace them. It got too expensive, and what we moved into was a rebuild program for those 129 vehicles. That didn't work out so well for us. It was a lot of work, for one thing. If we could have just rebuilt the diesel vehicles, it's basically it's a restoration project, because at some point you've got vehicles where the doors are barely hanging on and seats are torn, and you have all those issues. But at the same time, this is about 2000, I guess around 2006, somewhere in there. The California Air Resources Board came out with another rule, and they said if you're a public fleet, you have to retrofit your fleet with diesel particulate filters. So at the same time we were doing these rebuilds, we also had to put a diesel particulate filter on. So that, and it just started to snowball on us. We were buying newer engines that had electronic controls, so we could put the DPFs in them. And now you're into putting a newer engine in a truck that was never supposed to be in that truck. And we were trying to match up engines with diesel particulate filters, and it just got to be, you talk about down the rabbit hole, it got to be quite a project. And I would say it wasn't a very successful project at the end of it. You know, we saved some money, but trying to keep those trucks alive has been difficult, and trying to get parts for them now has been difficult. So you're really better off, if you're going to do that, just go buy them in the CNG, but it's a lot more money. Okay.